Today on Uncommon Knowledge, Social Security, taking it personally.
Funding for this program is provided by the John M. OLIN Foundation.
Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. Our show today is Social Security really in a crisis? And if it is, what should we do about it? In advocating his Social Security reforms, President Bush has over and over again made 2 points. The first, that unless we do something about it, Social Security will be bankrupt by the middle of the century. And the second, one key element of any reform must be the creation of private accounts that would allow workers to invest a portion of their payroll taxes in stocks and bonds. Is the president right about both of those? Joining us today, 2 guests. Alan Auerbach is a professor of economics and law at the University of California at Berkeley. John Cogan is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution who served on President Bush's commission to strengthen Social Security. President George W. Bush on Social Security, quote, "The crisis is now," close quote. Republican Congressman Rob Simmons of Connecticut on Social Security, quote, "Why stir up a political hornet's nest when there is no urgency? When does the program go belly up? 2042. I'll be dead by then," close quote. President Bush, the crisis is now. Congressman Simmons, who's right? John?
President Bush is more right. The system is heading for a train wreck.
But you want a little nuance there. All right. Alan?
It depends on what you mean by crisis. The problem gets worse every year. And if we don't deal with it now, some people may be dead when we deal with it, but those who aren't dead will have a much heavier price to pay.
Okay. Give this layman some feel for the scope of the problem. Social Security, created in 1935 to provide retirement and other benefits, financed by taxes on the first 90-some thousand dollars that each worker earns. The worker himself pays 6.2%, not an inconsequential figure, and the employer pays a matching 6.2%. Any program that takes more than 12% out of everybody's pay is a big deal in this country. For many years now, the Social Security system has collected more in revenues than it has paid out in benefits. The system is in surplus. So, tell me what the problem is.
The problem is that the old age dependency ratio is going up very rapidly.
By which you mean?
By which I mean the share of the population collecting benefits relative to the share of the population paying payroll taxes. That means that in a system which is basically a pay-as-you-go system, as we have, the money coming in has to cover benefits for a lot more people. That's just going to continue happening. It's partially due to the large baby boom generation, but it's also due to increasing life expectancy. So it's really a permanent problem because the number of years in people's lives after 65 or after 62 or whenever people retire is much greater than it was in previous generations.
By the way, can I just pause for a moment and try to induce either one of you to spit upon the system as it was originally instituted, in the sense that the notion is abroad and has been encouraged for some decades now, that when that money goes out of your paycheck, in some way or other, you're contributing to your own retirement. And that has been a lie from the first day. Is that not the case?
Well, that's certainly not the case. As Alan said, and as you said, the system is a pay-as-you-go system. That means the taxes that are collected from today's workers are going to finance the benefits paid to today's retirees. There's no savings in this program. There's no investment in this program. You asked about how soon the problem is down the road. Let me put it in simple terms. As Alan said, demographics are a very big part of the problem. Right now we have 3 workers for every retiree. In 20 years we'll have 2 workers for every retiree. The first of the baby
Do I get to choose which 2?
The first of the baby boomers retires in 3 years. So the problem is upon us, and that's why the president's right. Address it now.
Okay, now, John Cogan says the problem is upon us, but not everybody agrees with that opinion. Economist Paul Krugman, quote, "Social Security is a much smaller factor in projected deficits than either tax cuts George W. Bush's tax cuts, or rising Medicare spending. Viewed on its own terms, Social Security has been run responsibly. That is to say, the system has been in surplus for years now and is a sustainable system. The problem isn't with Social Security, it's with the rest of the budget. There's something to that, isn't there, John?
Well, it hasn't been run responsibly. In fact, the surpluses that you have mentioned have been used year in and year out for the last 20 years to finance other governmental activities. Used to finance the Cowgirl Hall of Fame, Amtrak subsidies, farm subsidies, foreign aid. Whenever Congress
I'm not so
needs
sure about
additional
foreign aid,
money,
but we need that Cowgirl Hall of Fame, John.
whenever Congress feels it needs money for something, the Social Security surpluses are a convenient pool of money to take from, and they have. And what do? Each year they put in IOUs.
Understand all of that, but isn't it nevertheless the case? I mean, I still want to push on this Krugman point that the Social Security system is in surplus.
Right.
It's the government may have been raiding it over and over again, but why are we talking about fixing that system instead of the government's propensity to spend money it ought not to spend?
There are a few points here. First of all, John's may be right about the government as a whole, but if you look at the Social Security system, you can say, well, the government's been irresponsible, but the Social Security system on its own terms has been running surpluses. Of course, those surpluses are, in some sense, a fiction because we aren't taking into account the very heavy implicit liabilities that we've been incurring. The reason why we say Social Security has a problem, even though it appears to have a current surplus, is because we know we have an obligation to pay under the current system. We have an obligation to pay very, very substantial benefits in the future. So we do have a problem, even taking account of the current surpluses, even just looking at Social Security and not paying attention to what the rest of the government is doing. As to the other point about how Social Security, how big the Social Security problem looks relative to the rest of the government,
Right.
it is correct that Social Security is a smaller problem than Medicare and Medicaid taken together. Those are huge problems, and I guess it's a political question what you should deal with first. Saying that those are bigger problems is not saying that you should not deal with Social Security.
George Will has made the point a couple of times that although we are tying ourselves in knots trying to figure out how to solve the Social Security problem, Social Security is actually easy by comparison with Medicare. And therefore, Social Security is indeed the right place to start. That the Bush administration, you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think
I would
we're
agree with that,
farther,
too.
much farther along in terms of policy development and a consensus about what will work and what won't work in retirement than we are in health.
Here's what George W. Bush wants. Next, would personal accounts solve the Social Security crisis? Here's what George W. Bush wants to do. I quote the president himself. What I think you ought to do, this is a slightly rambling quotation because he was speaking off the cuff. This is not from a speech. I'm defending his speechwriters here. What I think you ought to do is to be able to take some of the money you're paying in and set up what's called a personal retirement account. Think about private property in an account that you can pass on to who you want that earns a better return than the current system, and you'll end up with more money. Close quote. So you put money into personal retirement accounts. These accounts actually earn a much better return than anybody would get from Social Security. And the notion there is what? That you've solved the fiscal crisis?
No, and even the president himself has said that this doesn't in itself address the fiscal crisis. Social Security reform involves two pieces, which, although they politically may be tied together, are logically distinct. One is either raising taxes or cutting benefits in some manner to close the long-run funding gap. The other is...
You concur with that? Yep.
The other is how one structures benefits. Shall it be a private system? Shall it be the current system we have now? Shall people make investment decisions themselves? Will the investment decisions be left for the government? Those are all the issues that are involved in thinking about privatization, which are logically distinct than I think, the more painful issues having to do with...
Then let us turn to John Cogan, one of the nation's leading proponents of private accounts. You've just nodded, as Alan said, that the private accounts don't actually fix the fiscal problem. What good do they do? Why are you so ardent?
They help fix the fiscal problem.
Oh, they do? All right, go ahead.
Absolutely. But first, I think the most important feature about personal accounts is what they do for workers. They would give every worker a chance to build a little financial nest egg, and that nest egg would provide them with a better financial deal than the current Social Security system would provide them. It would give them, in addition, more control over their retirement decisions. And so they're very, very good for workers. If you were establishing a Social Security system today, not in 1935, but today, personal accounts would be part of that system, as they are for federal workers now. How are personal accounts good for Social Security? Well, the way I see it is, in order to have a viable retirement program, either private or public, you've got to have a program that saves and invests. The problem with the current Social Security system is it neither saves nor does it invest.
It spends every penny of surplus, just spends it.
Spends it. Personal accounts are a way of utilizing these surpluses that we have today and we will have for another dozen years for Social Security. And thereby it'll help reduce the overall problem that Social Security has down the road. It gives Social Security a saving component and it gives Social Security an investment component. It's not big enough, the personal accounts that come out of these surpluses are not big enough to fix the whole Social Security problem. But there will be more money that's being used for retirement purposes in the new Social Security program than are being used now.
But John, logically, let's look at the Bush plan. The president proposes to essentially lend people money at a fair government interest rate. The loans will be paid back out of reduced public benefits.
Hold on, lending people money, now I'm confused. I thought the whole point of private accounts was that it would be their own. He used the word private property.
What President Bush is proposing to do is to allow people to divert a portion of their payroll taxes into private accounts. In exchange, they have to give up a certain fraction of their future benefits from the existing public program.
Right.
The way that reduction is calculated, it would be as if the government were loaning people money at a reasonable rate of interest to make investments in their personal accounts. Think of it as a government-sponsored margin account.
All right.
Okay, so if the government then funds these loans that it's making to people, it has to come up with the money somewhere by borrowing. The government
this is the transition costs, right?
But it's really pretty simple. The government is borrowing the money that it is giving people to put into these accounts. As a result, and of course the people will pay it back in the future, and the government will be able to pay.
Can I ask? So we know. Let's get to the bottom of this issue of whether or not private accounts would cost taxpayers more in the long run. Under the current system, without making a single change, the government faces massive liabilities off in the future.
Exactly.
Is it accurate to say that by shifting a portion of this to private accounts, the government is doing no more than recognizing now the liabilities that it faces in the future? It's simply moving them forward in time. Or is it actually incurring more costs than it would under the present system?
No, you're absolutely right. If the present system were to continue unabated, then simply recognizing the liabilities of that system by borrowing against the future benefits, reducing the future benefits, giving people money for their private accounts, you're right. It's just recognizing the debt we already have. And therefore, it's that.
So we can shoot down one piece of cant right now, and the piece of cant is that Bush is proposing hundreds of billions of dollars in new or additional costs. That's just not the case. He's proposing, in effect, that the government stand up to its obligations now rather than later. Is that correct? You'll go with that?
I will go with that, except the response is really a criticism of that would be a political one, not one of economic logic, which is that if you thought that those benefits were going to be eroded anyway through some sort of changes in the future, then by recognizing the liabilities today, you're basically putting them into law. You're saying we don't just have this unclear, unfunded liability that we might have to pay benefits in the future. We're making that a clear liability today.
The bottom line of the Bush plan is, as Alan said, and as you just said, look, you're recognizing some future liability on the books today. My belief is, just as with a private corporation, that if you have a future liability, you should put it on the books today. Personal accounts are a way of doing that. Now, let me come back to this question.
You're making a moral argument. The government ought to tell the truth about
this. There is a very strong moral argument in favor of personal accounts. Government should not
This is what I'm
be
going to ask you to comment
promising,
on. Go ahead. Okay.
government should not be promising benefits to future generations of retirees that require higher taxes on future generations of workers. It's in effect proposing, or actually legislating, higher benefits for future retirees than it's willing to pay to today's retirees. And then desiring to impose taxes on future workers that it's unwilling to impose on today's workers. That is something that
Private accounts are simply healthier because in this country we believe private property is healthy in and of itself. Furthermore, they're more honest. It's the government fessing up to responsibilities now. Do you buy that?
There's an argument for that, but that has nothing to do with fixing the Social Security system.
Okay.
I think these are two separate issues.
All right.
You can talk about property rights, the advantages of private ownership, of people being familiar with the stock market. Those are all arguments for privatization, but they don't do fix.
Next, one simple solution to Social Security's problems.
Journalist Susan Lee in the Wall Street Journal, quote, "You will be able to fix Social Security yourself in the time it takes to recite this sentence. Drop the wage indexing formula," close quote. Would you care to explain that?
Yes. Currently, Social Security benefits grow at the same rate that wages grow. Some people call that wage indexing. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but it's useful to think of.
For the purposes of the television, that's a close approximation.
Right. Wages over the long term grow faster than prices because of productivity growth.
Right.
We can pay higher real wages over time because productivity is growing. Benefits that are growing with wages grow faster than benefits that are growing at the rate that prices increase. So if we switch the system to one where each successive generation's benefits grew only with prices, protecting people from inflation but not giving them the benefits of productivity growth, and we kept the system that way forever, then the public system would be more than fixed. That is, the funding gap that we currently have would be replaced with a small funding surplus.
Susan Lee goes on to say, I quote her, as economist John Cogan points out, who the hell is he? The purchasing power of benefits paid to today's teenager are scheduled to be 60% higher than benefits paid to a typical worker who retired in 2001. Okay, fellas, why don't we just do this? Change the indexing formula.
It makes so much sense, doesn't it? Alan mentioned something that's very important. That is, if you simply went to a price index system in which all future generations of retirees would receive the same real benefits after you've accounted for inflation, same real benefits as today's retirees get, you would not only fix Social Security, financial problem, but you'd have some surplus left over.
You could cut that payroll tax.
You could either cut that payroll tax or
the most regressive tax in the nation.
Or you could shore up the safety net part of Social Security by increasing benefits to widows, increasing benefits to low-wage workers.
Oh, come
and
on,
still
come on.
within.
Don't talk about, you're going to expand the welfare state instead of cutting taxes?
before you-
I'm just saying that's an option.
But before you get too excited about this prospect, let's look, instead of looking ahead, let's look back. Suppose somebody said, we've got a good offer for you, retirees. We're going to give you the same standard of living as Civil War veterans enjoyed. How would you like that? Is that fair? Would you say, well, that's okay because I have the same purchasing power as people who retired in the 1860s or the 1880s had? Of course not. We have a moving target, if you like, of what we think is appropriate, what we think the poverty line is. And benefits that are constant in real terms over short periods of time, well, our perceptions don't change that much. But if we're talking about keeping real benefits the same, that is adjusting for only for inflation, we're saying that the retirees, at least to the extent that they rely on Social Security benefits, are going to have the same absolute standard of living 50 years from now that they do today, even as everybody else in the economy is enjoying a much, much higher standard of living.
John?
Alan, that's a very good point. And I guess the way I would respond is first, as an economist, we know that the CPI overstates inflation. So even if you went to a
CPI is the Consumer Price Index.
used to measure the cost of living increase, we know that it overstates the real cost of living increase. And so if you went to this new price index system, you would have still growth in the standard of living. But a more important response is to ask yourself first, who should make the decision about those future benefit levels? Should it be today's Congress deciding what retirees 50 years from now should get? Or should it be a Congress 50 years from now saying, look, we've got other needs. We've got poor individuals that are below the age of 65 or 67. We've got young people that need additional education, whatever it is. Shouldn't that Congress decide how much in the way of benefits retirees should get at that point in time? Don't you think that's a better governmental system?
John, you're arguing that we should have a slower growth of benefits. And then the benefit, or putting it another way, that benefit cuts is a way of solving the funding problem. I don't necessarily disagree with that. I would probably throw in some tax increases as well as benefit cuts, but I'm not sure I would design the benefit cuts this way to just be bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger over time. I might do it more quickly. These, having price indexing, for example, only means that benefits are eroded slowly.
This has to be quick because we're running out of time. Has anybody anywhere in this debate suggested means testing, or is that really politically beyond the pale? That we ought to reserve Social Security payments to people who need it instead of people who just use it to pay their greens fees?
It's been proposed indirectly by Robert Posen, for example, who suggested doing the price indexing instead of wage indexing, but only for higher income people.
You've been in and out of Washington. You're advising the White House. In even the blue sky discussions about what they ought to do, does anybody mention that? Means testing?
Well, all of the benefit proposals that you've heard coming from the Hill
right.
and coming from think tanks all flatten out the benefit profile from low wage to high wage workers. It's not quite a means test, but
it's a move in a reasonable direction.
And the argument is a very, very sensible one. It's, as Alan said, high-income people have other means for achieving their retirement income.
Okay.
But this is a very important point about personal accounts. If you ask me who the main beneficiaries of personal accounts are, it's low-wage workers that don't now have an opportunity to save and invest. This would give them an opportunity to use their own money, not some governmental borrowed money, but their own money for personal accounts.
We're running out of time. Let me ask.
Finally, predictions on the future of personal accounts and Social Security reform.
3 predictions. Try to keep your answers short. Not analysis, but just predictions. I'd like to see how you guys think the country is moving and the economy is moving. President George W. Bush, quote, "I like the idea of promoting an ownership society." There's that phrase again. "I think it makes sense to have people feel a stake in the future by owning something. I like the concept of people getting a quarterly statement about how their stocks and bonds are doing in their own personal account." Close quote. Before he leaves office, will this president be able to sign personal retirement accounts into law? Alan?
Possibly, but not the proposal that he's made.
John?
I believe so. In the end, I believe so, yes.
In his first term, George W. Bush added $1 trillion to the national debt and, in the form of his prescription drug benefit, enacted the biggest new entitlement since Lyndon Johnson. Will he indeed be known as a president who took the country in the direction of an ownership society, or simply as or primarily as a president who expanded the federal government and indeed massively increased federal debt? John?
If he gets Social Security reform, I think he will be known for his Social Security reform. I think
that's such a critical reform that will be historic.
Right. It will be historic, not only for Social Security, but it'll serve as a model for, I think, Medicare and our healthcare system. I think that he will be criticized for his expansions of government and for the deficits, much as President Reagan was criticized for his. But I don't think that criticism is going to end up being all that important in influencing the public's view of his presidency if he gets personal accounts and the situation in Iraq turns out as it has been going quite well.
What's it going to be on the domestic fiscal side?
I think he'll be remembered as the president who finally severed the link between the Republican Party and fiscal responsibility.
Ooh.
Go ahead now. Them's fighting words. Go ahead and back yourself up.
Well,
I may have to flip it back to Cogan to let him defend the president here.
You know, he's often been compared to Reagan, starving the beast, and so forth. The beast is doing quite well. under President Bush. We haven't had...
Was that a political mistake? Is he having trouble on Social Security, in part because nobody can listen to him with a, not nobody, but the political class in Washington has trouble listening to him with a straight face, when he himself has created fiscal problems that dwarf the fiscal problem of Social Security?
No, I don't think so. I think his solution to Social Security is designed to address a debt problem, and so no, I don't think so.
Alan?
Well, he created very large deficits through tax cuts, through spending increases, and through the Medicare prescription drug benefit.
A quarter of a century from now, will Bush be known will Bush be remembered for beginning the transformation of the welfare state into the ownership society?
No.
No?
Yes.
You think
Yes, I think he'll be an important part of it.
Alan, John, thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter.
I'm Peter Robinson for Uncommon Knowledge. Thanks for joining us.
We welcome your comments on this week's show. Our email address, comments@uncommonknowledge.tv. For more information about Uncommon Knowledge, please visit our website, www.uncommonknowledge.tv.
Funding for this program was provided by the John M. Olin Foundation.